Member for Stormont-Dundas-South Glengarry.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. It's a pleasure to rise today in the House to speak to the Budget Implementation Act. This is the first time for myself as a new member of Parliament to speak to a federal budget. It's hard to believe I've been here 19 months, but this is our first budget. And to speak today about what it means for my constituents in Stormont-Dundas-South Glengarry and what it means for our country. It's very hard in 10 minutes to put a federal budget and all your thoughts together, but I'll do my best here. When we talk about $300 billion in revenue, $650 billion in expenses, equaling a deficit of $350 billion last year. Finally, after 2 years, we got a federal budget. And that is important because we've seen a lot of money go out the door for those in need. Conservatives have supported programs that have helped people. But we need this accountability. We need this framework, the whole picture of the budget, to see what's happening in our country in terms of both short and long-term fiscal sustainability. It's been during different world wars, during the last global pandemic that we saw a century ago, and any time in our history, we've never gone this long without a budget. The United States and the United Kingdom, which I cite here often in the House, Mr. Speaker, never skipped a beat, and they were able to continue to produce budgets throughout, but nevertheless, we are here, we've got a document, and able to comment on it. Mr. Speaker, in my limited time, I want to focus on two key themes, if I can. I call them the two Ds, debt and delivering. Frankly, this budget does not take our financial realities seriously. More than 6 years, about 6 years of this Liberal government with the Prime Minister, they have accumulated more debt in the last 6 years than every other government and Prime Minister combined before it. We've spent hundreds of billions of dollars, and I acknowledge and will say again, many of those programs we supported because they're the right thing to do to help people in need. But they were some of the highest per capita in the developed world in terms of spending. When we look at our unemployment rate compared to similar G7 countries, Canada stands, recently I was looking at the OECD website, I think it was a couple weeks ago when I was putting this together, 8.1%. The G7 average at that time was 5.6%. And we could all watch in amazement with Japan, an unemployment rate of an incredible only 2.6%. We have spent nearly the most, frankly, to get the least amount of results in terms of our outlook and being able to kick off and move forward past COVID. My political science degree comes in a little bit handy here, back from Carleton University, and looking at some of the history of budgeting and our fiscal realities in our country. The Parliamentary Budget Officer came out recently and said, at best, we'd have 1%, maybe 2% growth. For the amount of money that we spent, the times that we're in, we're seeing other economies growing at a much faster rate. But the reason why I believe my political science degree comes in handy here today is going back and looking at the amount of debt. If we go back a generation ago for debt that was raised during the first Trudeau government of the day, the challenge of the PC government and Brian Mulroney and into Jean Chrétien and Paul Martin's Liberal governments, it was interest rates that truly hurt our economic outlook in this country. It was increased interest rates, not in the short term, right when the debt was acquired, but over the course of time that led to significant structural deficits in this country. And we saw actually under a Liberal government, under Jean Chrétien and Finance Minister Paul Martin, cuts to health and social programs at that time in an effort to get our budget sustainable. I worry we could be in the same situation. The numbers we're seeing today, even in context and in contrast, are astronomically larger than we saw back a generation ago, back when I was just starting out in elementary school. Nevertheless, that lesson is important. Mr. Speaker, I say this respectfully. I get frustrated looking at this and thinking we can't get anything done in this country anymore very easily. We take a look at the slow vaccine rollout. We are now spending and acquiring a higher and higher deficit because we did not secure vaccines early enough to be able to reopen and get our small businesses and our jobs back on track, to be able to wind down support programs because our economy was reopening, like we're seeing in the United Kingdom, like we're seeing in the United States, because they were able to successfully procure vaccines, get them into the arms of their citizens, and reopen. And we're seeing numbers that are quite safe lately when they're able to do that. We talk about getting things done. And I look at the United Kingdom. They were in a similar situation to Canada in not having domestic vaccine procurement in this country. Under the leadership of the UK government, when COVID hit, they put a wartime-like effort, they called it, to build domestic capacity within their country. They worked tooth and nail, and when vaccines were approved and ready to be manufactured, the UK was able to do it and look after their citizens. In Canada, our Prime Minister took 1 year to make an announcement in North York and Toronto. To much fanfare, you open up the website and you look. The facility will be ready in 2027. There is a direct contrast there, Mr. Speaker. The United Kingdom and Canada took two different approaches, had two different results, and it is very clear here today. Which builds on my second point, delivery, Mr. Speaker. Delivering on what you say you're going to do. So you notice the title here as we're discussing it is not just the Budget Act, but the Budget Implementation Act. And as I sit here as a Conservative member on this side, as a member of the opposition, and as representing rural Eastern Ontario, the word deliverology was a big word that the new Liberal government of the day in 2015 used. They splashed it out at cabinet retreats. They had speakers come on about how deliverology was going to be the way of the Liberal government. I hope they fired that guy. Well, they did actually, Mr. Speaker, because you don't hear that talked about anymore. The key theme in a lot of my speeches have been this government, I'll give a compliment. They are the best in the game in terms of making an announcement and making you feel good. But they do not have the ability to properly implement what they say they want to do. A for announcement, F for follow through. Regardless of where you sit in this House, Mr. Speaker, we have to ask ourselves, can we actually, when we see some of these items in here, rehashed over and over and over again, are we going to see any different result? Childcare. How many times have we seen this Liberal government commit to national childcare? Over and over again, they promise this time will be the year that they get it done. Interprovincial trade. We've seen that numerous times. Very little progress. On the environment, Mr. Speaker, every target they've set for themselves, they failed to meet it. I think of infrastructure projects in my riding, and I'm appreciative in making sure we get our fair share of dollars back here at home. But timely announcements of those projects. In South Glengarry, Charlene Rink got approval for funding. That's wonderful. However, they got the money too late. They can't go to tender this year, and now this infrastructure project is delayed likely another year to be able to be completed. And I want to acknowledge the situation in a perfect national example. And I don't want to say national shame, but with Lac-Mégantic, Mr. Speaker. It has been 8 years since that disaster happened. I can still remember the images here while I was a staffer on Parliament Hill watching that horrible day. The lives lost in the anger and frustration that had happened. We're now looking at the year 2024, maybe the government says, and we're still under negotiation. We're still looking for more details. It's still not out to tender. It's still not a shovel in the ground. My colleague today successfully passed a resolution calling for this to be recommitted to. How is it on something so vital of a national disaster of that scale, it is taking us over a decade at least to get that project done? Mr. Speaker, I say we're losing the ability to get things done in a reasonable, timely manner. The dollars that we spend in a federal budget need to be timely, they need to be targeted, and they need to be temporary for our sustainability. Saying you're going to spend money is not a result. Actually checking off projects, tangible differences, putting that money to proper, efficient use. There's virtue signaling, there's talking a good game, and there's actually delivering. Madam Speaker, as I wrap up, we have an amazing country, great businesses, and great people. but we are seeing the government's inability to deliver to hamper our recovery. I look forward to my colleagues' questions and answers and hope we can get better implementation of federal budget.
Questions et commentaires. Questions and comments. The honourable member for South Okanagan West Kootenay. That's not. Esquimalt. Esquimalt Souk. Yes, I'm sorry. And I was so proud of myself.
Souk. Madam Speaker, you were getting so good at it. I thank the honourable member for his speech, and I know that there are a great many things he and I agree on, but the budget's probably not one of them. And I want to point out at this point that because the Democrats have said we won't plunge the country into an election during the pandemic, he has the luxury of voting against this bill in its entirety. But I want to ask about a provision that this Budget Implementation Act brings forward, and that's cutting the CERB benefit starting July 1st by 40% from people who aren't back to work yet. Yes, I'd like to see an early reopening. Less, I'd like to see everybody not needing the CERB benefit. But does the honourable member support cutting by 40% the benefits that are being offered to those who aren't able to get back to work yet?
The honourable member for Stormont-Dundas-South Glengarry.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you to my colleague for the NDP. He is somebody that he knows I have a great deal of respect for, and we do agree on some issues here and there, certainly. On his comment about that, I'll go back to my comments before. We need to have supports as people begin to recover. I'm frustrated that we have to offer CERB as we go into this summer because parts of our country will still be reopening. I think we've made it very clear that we need to be there for our businesses. We need to be there for individuals. But for me, that means getting more vaccines into arms quickly that we can safely reopen. And I think the fact that in July, almost a year and a half after, months behind the United Kingdom, the United States, Israel, other countries that have had successful vaccine rollouts, the fact we're even needing to have this and not getting our businesses allowed to reopen and flourish and regrow our economy, that is a failure in itself.
Questions et commentaires. Questions and comments. The honourable member for Sarnia-Lambton.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker, and I'd like to thank my colleague for an excellent speech and for all of his hard work. And I share his concern with this budget that there are a lot of things that have been promised time and again that have not shown up, and that we are losing our ability to do things in this country. And one of the things that was really absent in this budget, I thought, was something to inspire the natural resources sector. Looked like there was zippity-doo-dah in this budget, and considering the contribution to our GDP and the fact that the industry's been decimated, I would have expected the government to identify some package there. What does the member think about that?
The honourable member for Stormont-Dundas-South Glengarry.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you to my colleague from Sarnia-Lambton for that. And I would agree with her. Our natural resources sector, and I've said and I've spoken in the House many times about the importance of our natural resources and the importance that it has, not just for those in Alberta and Saskatchewan, but our entire country. We are lucky from the East Coast to the West Coast in a wide variety of jobs and industries on there. The budget, when you look through it, is very absent. More than ever, the sector needs our support. When we talk about the environment and the opportunities to do better environmentally, investments in our oil and gas sector, investments in research and development, investments in technology can make Canada a world leader on emissions reductions and job retention. People in Alberta and Saskatchewan and across the country look at this, and it's certainly been missing in this federal budget.
L'honorable député d'Avignon.
The honourable member for Avignon, Madame Matapédia. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Well, just follow up on what was spoken about by my colleague. When they say, let's help these polluting industries transition, I think that's potentially good, but we're still taking taxpayer money and putting it in those industries when in my region, factories are being closed, wind farms are being closed, and they're having to lay off employees because some other level of government doesn't believe that they should invest in wind power. So to continue to subsidize these sectors that produce so much pollution, I just have a hard time supporting that. I think there are a lot of things that we need to do. We need to move towards an energy transition, but we also need to invest more in renewable energies. And oil is not one of those. So I'd like to hear my colleague on that.
Stormont-Dundas-South, Glengarry.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you to my colleague for the block. From that, I think we will agree that the environmental plan that's been presented by the government has not met what it said it's going to do. Every target that's been set has been missed. And to her point, if you speak to the oil and gas sectors and workers, they don't want government assistance. They don't want any subsidies. They want the government to get out of the way and allow them to grow the sector. And we can do that, as we've recently announced in our environmental plan, investing in the sector with the technology. It's amazing out there. Every time and every opportunity we get, there's so much technology, there's so much potential for the industry. The government just needs to get back and let the sector flourish.